Welcome to Know What I Mean. My name is Oscar.
My name's George, and I'm currently just about to get out of isolation because I ended up getting COVID last week. And that is why we're now doing another one over Zoom rather than in person, even though we're still both in Brighton.
This episode, I ended up doing quite a lot of research for this episode, talking about carnivals, looking into different bits and pieces. It was really fun, actually. I came home a few hours ago before recording this, and I was thinking, I'm like really excited to actually continue researching right up until we hit record, really. So that was really fun. And it feels like as we're going into 2022, I definitely want to bring more of that in, and invest a little bit more time into, getting in some little rabbit holes, seeing if I can find any interesting pieces that don't already exist in my brain. So it was really fun to test that out. Yeah. And I really connect with this quote. So that was also fun to explore. As you might have noticed, the audio isn't so great on this episode. I apologize for that. You can blame COVID, basically. You can blame Omicron, any sort of hatred that you feel at the graininess of this episode. Just throw it into the list of resentments of Omicron and COVID. We'll be back to lovely audio quality next week. The quote for this week is by Emily Hasler. Dedicate your life to the twin and warring gods, precision and wild abandon. This is a poetic one this week. I just love it. It's one of the, I suppose there's a few quotes that, this is our 56th episode, and that's a lot of quotes, and a few of them stick. And I feel like this is going to be one that sticks because it's got a really good kind of energy to it. I'm speaking for you here, George, but I'd say that we both, the god of precision is probably winning in our lives between precision and wild abandon, I would say. Yeah, well, I would say we're kind of quite on top of things generally. And, we both like to be on top of things in our lives, and just that would be summed up by this kind of precision. And I suppose I picked this quote because it's a theme for me at the moment, looking at the balance between precision and wild abandon. So I recently, since October, so in the last 3 months or something like that, I have stopped drinking. And one of the ways this wild abandon is expressed traditionally and just for myself is through alcohol, because it's a way of reducing inhibitions and just allowing yourself to be a bit more free, and allowing that precision to kind of die down and something else to come up. That's been my experience of it. But now I'm not drinking. So it's been a bit of a theme for me at the moment to be exploring, how does this wilder energy get expressed in my life when I'm not drinking, basically. I'm not having this quite frequent outlet of just being able to kind of loosen up and not be so considerate of my actions. That outlet isn't there so much anymore. And I think that, as this quote suggests, it's a necessary part of human life. There are going to be people on either end of the spectrum, people that are more controlled and precise, and people that are wilder and more free, in quotations. And people are going to be on that spectrum, but we need both of those energies constantly. And there's always going to be a tension, but we need both of those energies kind of flowing in life. And I definitely feel that at the moment, it's a theme for me to explore, like, how can I find in a sober way this expression of wildness or kind of loosening up and just this energy of kind of freedom. I was looking into the word inhibition because this actually really links in with this sense of wild abandon, which I guess I'm more focused on being it's the side that I feel a bit deficient in. And I was thinking about drinking, and I was thinking about this wildness, and this word inhibition, which obviously gets linked to alcohol a lot, came up. And I was thinking, that's quite an interesting word. There's a core of it, which is inhibit. And I was looking at this word inhibit, and Latin root of the word inhibit is a restraining. So another way of talking about inhibitions is an involuntary check on an expression of an impulse. So this is a slight rabbit hole, but I would definitely link this idea of wild abandon with a lessening of inhibition. So allowing oneself to be unchecked and uncensored and expressive Yet my relationship with this side of things is quite conflicted. Actually, it's not that straightforward, and I think that that's why I found in my life that it's less prominent, because this going more with impulse and allowing oneself to be more, I suppose, to act more on impulse and be less inhibited. For me, it brings up a bit of an anxiety around basically acting unethically or saying the wrong thing or hurting someone. For example, like you kind of get pissed and then you say something, you say like a mean joke, or you're like, you're unkind to someone. And I have this anxiety around this sense of wildness and wild abandon that I feel I do something wrong with it. So that's something that I've been exploring, is what is the healthy relationship with this sense of wildness and this sense of just letting go. But I'd love to hear what your impression of this quote is, and we can kind of jump in.
So like we've talked about this quite a bit, the balance of two kind of things that are polar opposites in a way, but that you need to have both of those at the same time. And one thing that I think about it is you kind of need to have one or the other. Like it helps to really embody one when you need it and embody the other when you need it, rather than trying to be in this kind of in between of being like a bit precise and a bit wild. It's really important to understand, okay, no, this is a time where I need to be precise. I need to really look at the information that's available and make the right decision. And here's a time where I just want to let loose and go crazy. And I was actually thinking quite a lot about how you make those decisions, or when is the time when you should be precise and when is the time when you should be wild. And I think a lot of it is about how much information you have. So if you don't have enough information to make an informed decision, so because I do jiu-jitsu, I think about this in terms of like a fight. So imagine you're in a fight with someone and you're untrained. You don't really know what you're doing. Your best chance is wild abandon in that case. That's your only sort of Hail Mary to potentially win this confrontation. But if you've got a real understanding of combat and you're skilled in this area, then you could actually be much more precise. And that's how you're going to have the best chance of, winning in that particular engagement. So at the moment, I'm talking about both of these two powers in how they relate to, say, being productive or a particular endeavor that you're doing. You can also split it up as like maybe being precise in your work and then wild in your off time or whatever. But here I'm just applying it to a particular task that you're trying to get done and finding out the appropriate thing for it. And really the thing that seems to matter is the amount of information that you have. Because the abandon is a way to quickly gather information, because you're just doing lots of crazy, almost random things, and you're having a big impact on your environment. And you're brainstorming ideas or anything like that, and you're just kind of going all over the place and being crazy. That can be a great way to gather data, because you're just acting and you're just finding out what happens when you do all these different things without trying to think what is going to be the consequence of all these things. And once you've done this, once you've kind of acted in a more wild way, then you can start to be more precise and understand the process of it. Even this podcast, for example, the best way for us starting was just going for it and just starting. We didn't have all of the equipment. Funny enough, you're actually back with your ironing board as a desk and no microphone for this episode. But, that's how we started. It wasn't like getting everything precise and everything perfect before we recorded the first episode. And, the first 4 episodes or so, we didn't even release because we were just finding ourselves and finding our groove and what we wanted to do. But that's how we needed to start the podcast, was abandon. Just press record and just see what happens. And then we've got enough information, and then we can start to build systems for how we want to organize the episode, how we want to structure that, but also in terms of how we're going to edit the episode, how we're going to post it to Instagram, how we're going to do the captions and stuff like that. The way to do that really was to just do it messily the first time and then start to turn it into a system and make it more precise. And we've kind of oiled the machine, and now we've got things really nicely dialed in after a year of doing it. So those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you've gone for a way of it, like it's a trajectory, like a linear thing. So it's like it's quite common, like there's a pattern seemingly in that there will be a wildness or experimentation, something much more free-flowing initially, and then it becomes more precise in time and more refined. And I guess that's really obvious with one's life trajectory. You know, it's so much more common that as a teenager and a young person, you're wilder, you're experimenting more, you're trying a lot more things, and then as time goes on, then you get into your routines and you get into you become more refined. So yeah, I can definitely see that is a pattern. I wonder about this area of because the way that I'm relating to it at the moment is more like, you know, if you're imagining that you're walking down a path and on the left side is kind of wild abandon, on the right side is precision. You know, it's almost like we're sort of, or I'm finding myself drifting to the right quite naturally, you know, drifting into precision, you know, and precision and other ways that I could put precision is more refined, more controlled, more disciplined. That's how I would kind of put precision. And I'm kind of veering off that side, and I can see that there are so many positive qualities to that, but that's not the whole of life. That's half of life. And actually there's a time when it's important to actively start moving to the left side, moving into a kind of wilder space, and then actually to have an equilibrium and a balanced life, it is always going to be going between these two opposites. And how that might look, you know, I think it's super interesting. It's like one of the ways that that I've been thinking about, which you'll find funny, is this thing called 5 rhythms, which in Peep Show is known as rainbow rhythms.
That's so funny. I was actually thinking about that. Like earlier when you were saying about like what are like sober ways that I can that I can express this, I was just thinking of rainbow rhythms.
Yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know, 5 rhythms or rainbow rhythms is essentially like, it's a very hippie dance class where there's a journey of different kinds of music. It's different tempos and different energies. And essentially you're completely free to express yourself in any one of these energies. Like as the, you know, say if it's like an hour-long class, then there will be different parts, different types of music going through this hour-long class, and you're just allowing yourself to be taken by the particular energies of these different types of music. And like it generally looks like people running around with their hands in the air, or like shaking, or like lying on the floor, or like doing a fucking headstand, or like everyone's doing like completely different shit, and you look like an absolute nut job. But I have done it once, and it is really amazing as well as a form of expression, because it's totally uncontrolled, it's totally unhindered, it's just pure expression. And I mean, a huge part of doing that for me was letting go of control of how I was being perceived, because I'm so used to unconsciously and consciously, but largely unconsciously, controlling how I'm perceived through the way that I talk, through the way that I dress, through the way that I just am in the world. I want to portray myself in a certain way, and sprinting around in circles is not one of those ways that I generally try and control how I'm perceived, because I'm like, I look like a fucking idiot. So a lot of when I did this 5 rhythms was just watching as I was like getting really self-conscious, and then just allowing myself to drop that and be like, this is exactly the environment, this is the exact point in which wild abandon is, that's what it's about, you know, that's the whole thing. So yeah, that's definitely an example of like a sober opportunity for wild abandon. I can talk a bit, I was doing a little bit of research into this actually, because I listened to this really great podcast called the 𝗢𝗏𝗿 podcast, and highly recommend. Irish comedian, very, very funny, But really interesting, he does these rabbit hole podcasts where he just kind of goes down these research rabbit holes. And one of the episodes was partly focused on carnivals and the history of carnivals and their place in society. And I think it really links in with this. So in medieval times, there would often be these carnivals and festivals happening, and often they would be right before Lent. So I'm sure most people know, but Lent is a time of renunciation. You're giving something up for 40 days. And quite often before these periods of Lent and sacrifice would be these kind of crazy carnivals and just excess and expression, wild abandon, right? So there's different theories about why these carnivals happen, because at these times there would have been quite a lot of control happening on a societal level too. You know, it's just like there was a lot of hierarchies, and if you were very poor, you just really didn't have that much opportunity to kind of express yourself. And it was like these carnivals were these really, you know, there were ones supposedly which were literally around reversing these hierarchies for really short periods of time, where you could take the piss out of the king, and you could like drink in church and just do these really wild things that were very opposite to what was usually allowed, and stuff that would usually get you thrown in prison was suddenly allowed, right? And there's different theories about why these carnivals happen, but one of them is that it's sort of a it was like set up as a societal pressure valve. So actually the energy that is caught in Lent, or just general life of, you know, living in medieval times when, you know, people just weren't as affluent as we are, but like there was probably more stress around food, etc. It's just like there would be a build up over the year of a certain type of pressure, and your inability to express frustration at the hierarchy, for example, because you would get in a lot of trouble for it, meant that you'd be holding on to these resentments. And a carnival in this way would allow an opportunity for you to then just totally get it out and just totally express it and just allow yourself to totally loosen up. And then after that, then there'll be a period of Lent where you're really renouncing something and really giving stuff up, much more controlled, much more precise period of time. And I found that the contrast and the real manifestations of what this quote is getting at with precision and wild abandon is so nicely captured in this idea of carnival and Lent. And I think often we talk about on this show the similarities between the macro, so societal level stuff, and the micro, you know, like the daily existence or very personal experience. And this is perfect for that, I think, is that wild abandon is a necessary aspect of just shaking yourself out a bit. You know, it's kind of almost like if you sit down at your computer for too long, your body just gets really stiff and achy, and you just feel constricted, and you need to get up and you need to go for a run, or you need to shake around, you need to do some stretching. And that is the wild abandon. That is the pressure valve release. Yeah, so I found that quite an interesting equivalent, really.
Yeah, I think I definitely feel that in my life as well. Like you said, on the micro scale of, you know, when you're trying to be very logical or precise and trying to sort things out, it can feel so good to just completely let go and not have to worry about any of that stuff. And it's so healthy to find things like that in your life, because you can just become so rigid if you don't have those sorts of outlets. Yeah, so I think it's good to find whatever it is, if it's like rainbow rhythms or whatever, or like jiu-jitsu is a great one for that. Even though there's kind of a level of technique and precision in it, you're also putting yourself into a pretty wild situation where you're sparring with someone else, and you just have to like completely go into the moment. And, you know, even though you're trying to control the situation, you also really need to let go and just completely immerse yourself in it. That's a great way to do it.
And what do you think about the fact that this quote almost suggests that the wild abandon and the precision are on an equal foot, like they have basically equal space to take up in someone's life? Do you think that makes sense? Or
well, certainly the balance in my life is not that even. I don't think I have that quite that much. And to me, I think wild abandon does sound like very reckless. Like it's quite a loaded thing. It's not like it's important to have precision and release or something like that.
Yeah.
Is, wild abandon just makes me think of like drinking in the street, smashing windows and like going crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't fully agree with it in the way it's phrased. Actually, for some reason, for me, it doesn't actually resonate as much as a quote. Yeah, something about the language, just like when I read it, I don't fully accept it. Like I don't read it and think like, yeah, that really captures something that I feel. Even though I think, they're really important, these opposing forces. And I think that it could be worded in a different way that would resonate more with me. But yeah, some thing about how it's written. I don't feel like I want to spend half of my life in wild abandon. Although, well, actually, it does sound pretty fun. So I don't know.
You definitely spend the rest of your life
Yeah.
trying to pick up the pieces and
Yeah,
sort everything,
yeah. Well, maybe that's it. Maybe just go crazy for half the day, and then you're like, oh shit, what have I done? spend the rest of it trying to sort things out, and then you can go through it all again tomorrow. Yeah,
People
I think
live
they're
like
both
that.
valuable. Yeah, there are. Yeah. Yeah, you've got to find the balance, really.
I mean, it like, so you say, because I like this quote because I think it's quite poetic, but it's obviously, I mean, precision is quite, actually, it's milder than wild abandon as an opposite.
Yeah.
Like but, if we want to kind of tone it down and try and get to the essence of it, I think we probably would both agree that it is talking about these opposing forces of, say, you could even put it kind of like as, control or holding on. I really like the word receptivity. I think that's the wild abandon again. It's it's slightly jarring maybe, but you've got this energy and then receptivity or something like that, where it's like there's a certain point to push forward. I mean, you can even go with the kind of masculine and feminine ideas with that as well. There's a certain point to be pushing, and then there's a certain point to just be opening up or being receptive and accepting. Yeah. And I think it's those sorts of energies. And I do think that actually when you get down to the day-to-day existence, they are pretty, I mean, a balanced life is one where they're pretty equal, really, because, I'm just kind of thinking of it in relation to when I went on a walk this afternoon with my parents, and I notice in the conversation that, as you say, there'll be certain points where I feel kind of a contraction. I disagree with something, or I want input and I'm not able to have input, for example, and then there's kind of a contraction. And then other points where it's like that contraction, I am able to express myself, or there is I notice that contraction, and then I allow it to kind of loosen in my experience. And that is that play between this sort of more controlled energy and then a kind of letting go energy that is always playing. But you can imagine a life where you're a control freak and you really want to be in control all the time, and how imbalanced that would be, where you're constantly trying to control how you're being perceived, you're constantly trying to control and dominate a situation, conversation with people, you're trying to control circumstances all the time, and how that would be a kind of very imbalanced way of living, and there would be so much suffering in that way. But then on the opposite side, then it's like you have no discipline, no structure, everything is very vague and loose, and you're constantly kind of tripping yourself up by having no boundaries to anything, and that there will be loads of suffering in that, and you're going to end up in all sorts of difficult situations based on that kind of lifestyle. So it's, you can see, I mean, I'm sure everyone listening will know manifestations of both the control and the letting go in their most extreme forms, and that is not what you want. Basically, it's like you definitely want some sort of like balance between those two things. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that seems like a good moment to move on to the quote to next week, if you're ready.
I am ready.
Cool. Let's do it. So the quote I've got for next week is from Dale Carnegie, who's like the OG self-development guy. The quote is, "Nobody is so miserable as one who longs to be somebody and something other than the person they are in body and mind.
It's a good one to start the new year with. That's a good January quote.
So thanks for being with us. This is the final episode of 2021. Thanks for sticking with us this whole year. It's been an awesome journey, and I'm so glad we're still doing it. I mean, we already said a lot of, soppy stuff about how we enjoy the podcast and what it means to us in the previous episode. But yeah, I'm just pumped for the new year.
Indeed. Yes. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you can think of anyone that would like it, then please do give it a share. And we'll see you next week.
See ya.